What if the very first law was not written on stone, but whispered into the soul of the first human? What if the laws we often associate with Moses were never new at all? Imagine a command not given in thunder, but in breath. A divine rhythm set in motion before sin ever entered the world, before the tablets, before the prophets, before the priesthood. There was a man in a garden, and in his heart burned a covenant older than time. For generations, we have believed that the law began with a mountain. But what if it began with a garden? What if the Sabbath was not given at Sinai, but was already pulsing through the seventh day of creation? What if sacrifice was not born in the tabernacle, but rose with the smoke of Adam's first offering after the fall? What if purity was not a Levitical regulation, but a sacred echo of Eden, a calling to walk again in the presence of the holy? These are not guesses. Hidden within the banned books of ancient faith preserved in the shadows of time are scrolls that speak of Adam as more than a man. They speak of him as the first priest, the first keeper of sacred law, the Book of Jubilees, the Book of Enoch. Texts long silenced by councils and forgotten by tradition. Yet within their verses lies a story that changes everything we thought we knew about divine order. Because if the laws of Moses were not the beginning, then they are not the foundation. They are the continuation. And if that is true, then holiness is not a system. It is a memory, a return, a path walked by Adam, preserved by Noah, restored by Abraham, and formalized by Moses. A law not of religion, but of relationship. So today we peel back the veil. We will follow the ancient thread of sacred law from Eden to the Exodus, from forbidden texts to familiar scripture. And we will ask the question that religion forgot. What if Adam was not the first sinner? What if he was the first lawgiver? And what secrets are still hidden in the books they tried to erase? Let us begin. The law before the law. Adam the first keeper. Before there was Sinai, before there were priests or prophets, there was a man and a garden. And in that sacred space between the breath of God and the soil of the earth, something eternal was entrusted. Not a rule, not a religion, but a rhythm, a divine pattern, a sacred law. According to the Book of Jubilees, Adam was not merely the first man, he was the first priest, the first soul called to walk in step with the Creator, not out of fear, but out of communion. In the silence of Eden, Adam received more than a prohibition against a tree. He received the foundations of holiness. The Sabbath was not introduced in Exodus, it was born in Genesis. God rested, not because he was weary, but to consecrate time itself. And Adam, the image-bearer, was invited into that rest, into that cadence of creation, into that divine pause where holiness meets breath. Jubilees reveals that Adam was also shown the path of sacrifice, not because God required blood, but because love once broken needs mending. The altar was not about appeasement, it was about alignment. It was the place where dust remembered it was formed by breath. And purity, too, was woven into this first law, not as a checklist, but as a way of guarding the sacred spark within. To walk with God, Adam had to remain whole, not perfect, but willing to remain open to the light. This vision of Adam is not the story of a fall. It is the story of a beginning. A man clothed in responsibility, a soul entrusted with eternity. And though Eden was lost, the law was not. It passed like fire through the bloodline of the faithful. Even when the garden closed, the rhythm kept beating. The Sabbath, a cosmic rhythm before Sinai, long before the wilderness, long before the tablets. There was a day set apart, a silence that thundered with meaning. The Sabbath was not an invention of Israel. It was a memory of creation. The seventh day was the first sanctuary, and time itself was the altar. Genesis tells us that God rested, but rest in this context was not withdrawal. It was completion. It was communion. It was God dwelling with what He had made. And in that moment, the first human was invited not to work harder, but to be still, to remember, to enter into the holy rhythm of time. According to the Book of Jubilees, this day of rest was not given to Moses. It was taught to Adam, passed down through Noah, revered by Abraham, and observed even by angels. It was never meant for one people alone. It was written into the cosmos, a divine signature etched into every cycle of 7. Not just to pause from labor, but to realign the soul with the Creator's rhythm. Noah kept it while the world drowned in chaos. Abraham honored it in foreign lands. For them, the Sabbath was more than a ritual. It was a declaration, a refusal to live by the drumbeat of empires, a return to Eden in the middle of the wilderness. In a world that worships motion, the Sabbath whispers stillness. It calls us to remember that we are not machines. We are image bearers, and our worth was never measured by what we produce, but by the one whose breath we carry. The Sabbath is not a pause. It is a prophecy, a weekly return to the truth that holiness was never earned. It was always given. And in the heartbeat of that holy day, eternity still waits to be remembered. Sacrifice, the original language of devotion, before incense rose from temple courts, before blood ran across the altar of tabernacle stone. There was a manna garden and a longing to return. Sacrifice did not begin with Leviticus. It began with love broken and the ache to be whole again. According to the Book of Jubilees, Adam was shown the way, not by angels, not by tradition, but by the very voice of the Creator. The first altar was not built with tools. It was made of sorrow and surrender. After the fall, Adam stood outside the gates of Eden, not only covered in skin, but covered in grace. The sacrifice was not an offering of fear. It was a cry for restoration. Smoke rose like prayer, and with it the fragile hope that broken communion could be healed. Cain and Abel continued this practice, but their hearts diverged. Abel's offering flowed from faith, Cain's from ambition, and the ground bore witness to a truth older than law. That sacrifice without heart is hollow. That blood without humility cannot atone. Noah inherited this sacred pattern. When the flood receded and judgment had passed, his first act was to build an altar. Before rebuilding civilization, he rebuilt worship. His offering was not just gratitude, it was a declaration that holiness must begin again. That sacrifice is not about loss, it is about return. Abraham, too, was marked by altars. Every place he traveled, he built them, not as monuments to himself, but as anchors of presence. He knew that sacrifice was not an interruption to life. It was the center of it. And when asked to lay Isaac on the wood, it was not obedience to a cruel command. It was a moment where surrender touched eternity, where love held the knife and trust silenced the fear. The Book of Jubilees reveals these were not random acts. They were echoes of Adam's first devotion, a lineage of souls who knew that worship is costly, but always worth the price. Because true sacrifice is not about death. It is about offering life back to the one who gave it. And in every rising flame, a holy memory burns. Purity guarding the sacred within. Purity is often misunderstood. We see it as restriction. But to the ancients, it was revelation, a way to walk with God, not by rules, but by reverence. In the Book of Jubilees, purity is not first mentioned in Sinai's shadow. It begins with Adam. After the fall, God does not discard him. He clothes him, not just to cover shame, but to restore dignity. The garments were symbols, not of exile, but of invitation, that even outside the garden holiness could still be pursued. Adam was taught how to live in alignment with the sacred, what to touch, how to walk, what to guard. And this knowledge did not die with him. It passed to Noah, who washed his hands before sacrifice, who knew that the divine cannot dwell where the profane is entertained. His flood was not just a cleansing of the earth. It was a cleansing of spirit, a new beginning purified through water and obedience. Abraham, too, was a keeper of purity. The Book of Jubilees tells us he instructed his household in the ways of cleanliness and consecration, not to be better, but to be ready. Because to carry the covenant, the vessel must be clean, not perfect, but pure, not stainless, but set apart. Purity is not about fear of the world. It is about faithfulness to the presence. It is the art of guarding the image of God within from the corrosion of compromise. The ancient ones knew this. They did not pursue purity to be admired. They pursued it because they had seen the holy. And once you see it, you cannot return unchanged. In a world that celebrates exposure, purity is a quiet rebellion, a way of saying the soul is still sacred, and some things must remain untouched. Because where purity is honored, the presence still dwells. The cosmic war behind the laws, beneath the soil of Eden, behind the veil of history, there is a war, not of armies, but of alignments. A battle not just for territory, but for the soul of creation itself. According to the Book of Enoch, before the flood, a rebellion shattered the harmony of heaven. The Watchers, once divine guardians, descended, not in obedience, but in desire. And what they brought to earth was not wisdom. It was corruption. They taught forbidden knowledge, the secrets of weapons and enchantments, the crafting of vanity, the distortion of flesh. They blurred the line between what was made and what was manipulated. Their offspring, the Nephilim, were giants of violence. Their presence spread chaos like a plague, and humanity stood at a crossroads, to guard the sacred or to chase the forbidden. It is in this dark backdrop that the laws of Adam shine like fire. The Sabbath became more than a rhythm. It was resistance. To rest in God while the world ran after power was an act of war. Sacrifice became more than worship. It was warfare, a declaration that holiness would not be extinguished, and purity, once seen as personal, became a shield against spiritual contamination, against the influence of beings who sought to unmake what God had made. Noah did not just build an ark. He built a refuge for the divine pattern. While others mingled with darkness, he preserved the light. His obedience was a weapon, his faith a fortress. And Abraham, called from a land of idols and shadowed altars, became a new beginning. By clinging to the law of Adam, he stood against the ancient rebellion still echoing in the world. The laws of old were not fragile rituals. They were sacred defenses, not created by man, but breathed by God to keep his people tethered to truth. Because the war is not over, and every generation must choose again. In every choice toward holiness, the garden remembers its promise, the transmission through the Patriarchs' law as legacy. From Adam's breath to Abraham's tent, the law did not vanish. It was carried, like a flame through the winds of history. passed not through institutions, but through intimacy, father to son, altar to altar, covenant to covenant. Abraham was not given something new. He was called to remember what had always been. The Book of Jubilees tells us that he restored what had faded. He brought back the Sabbath, not as law, but as love. He rebuilt the practice of sacrifice, not to appease but to draw near. He taught purity, not for control, but for consecration. Even circumcision, often seen as Mosaic, is revealed as more ancient, a sign that the body itself is marked by covenant, that the physical bears witness to the spiritual. Abraham's family was not a religion. It was a sanctuary. His tent was a mobile Eden, his journey a pilgrimage of remembrance. Isaac inherited the fire. Jacob carried the altar. And through their line, the divine pattern endured, not perfectly, but faithfully. These were not inventors. They were guardians. Their obedience kept the memory of Eden alive, because some laws are not written in ink. They are etched into the bloodline of those who refuse to forget. And when they walked in the ancient ways, the earth trembled with the memory of paradise. Moses and the law rewritten in stone. Then came the mountain, wrapped in smoke and thunder, Sinai, where the divine voice once more broke into the world of men. But this was not a beginning. It was a remembering, a covenant not new, but renewed, a law not invented, but engraved. Moses did not climb to receive novelty. He ascended to receive confirmation. According to the Book of Jubilees, the law given to him was already recorded in the heavenly tablets, eternal, unchanging, a divine design that had always been. The 10 Commandments were not innovations, they were recognitions. The Sabbath already kept by Adam, honoring parents already lived by Noah, prohibitions against theft and murder already practiced by Abraham. Sinai was not the first time God spoke. It was the moment when his whisper was carved into stone. The laws of sacrifice and purity were not cold obligations. They were codifications of a living tradition. They gave structure to what had long been sacred. And in doing so, they preserved it. Moses was not building a religion. He was building a remembrance. A return to Eden through obedience, a map back to the sacred rhythm written into the world. And when he came down from the mountain face, shining hands full of stone, he did not bring a new law. He brought the echo of a much older voice. And in that echo, the garden opened once more. There is a silence deeper than words, a law older than memory, a covenant that did not begin on a mountain, but in a garden. What we have uncovered is not a list of rules. It is a heartbeat, a sacred rhythm that began not with Moses, but with the breath of Adam. The Sabbath, sacrifice, purity. These are not rituals born of religion. They are the patterns of the Creator's own Spirit offered to humanity as a way to walk in step with the divine. The banned books whispered what tradition forgot. That holiness was not a later invention. It was the original design. The divine law was not given to control. It was given to preserve, to protect what is sacred in a world that forgets. Adam did not simply fall. He carried a flame, one that flickered in the hands of Noah, one that was cradled by Abraham, one that Moses carved into stone. And now, that flame reaches us. So the question is not whether the law still matters. The question is whether we will remember it. Will we see the Sabbath not as a rule, but as a return? Will we view sacrifice not as loss, but as love? Will we pursue purity not as performance, but as presence? These are not ancient relics. They are invitations, and they wait for our response. If this journey stirred something within you, if it opened questions or called old truths back to life, let the conversation continue. Like this video if it brought value to your understanding. Share it with those who seek deeper wisdom in their walk of faith. And subscribe to this channel so we can continue to uncover hidden treasures in the Word together. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. What spoke to you? What challenged you? What mystery still lingers? Because the ancient law was never meant to be forgotten. It was meant to be remembered, not just in Scripture, but in us.